I still remember the exact moment when I realized I needed to take back my life. It wasn't when I was working double shifts to pay for Emma's college textbooks. It wasn't when my mother casually mentioned that her credit card debt had ballooned to 5 figures again. It wasn't even when I realized I hadn't taken a vacation in 3 years because someone in my family always needed financial rescue. No, it was when my sister slid that wedding planner binder across my kitchen table, opened, to a page showing a venue that cost more than my annual salary, looked me in the eye and said, "You'll handle this part, right?" I mean, that's what big sisters do. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up at that kitchen table, poised between decades of guilt and the precipice of freedom, you need to know how it all began. My earliest memories of my father are fragmented, like pieces of colored glass that I've tried to assemble into something whole. I remember his laugh, deep and sudden, like he was always surprised by joy. I remember how he'd carry me on his shoulders through the park, my small hands gripping his hair while he pretended to be a horse. I remember the smell of his aftershave when he kissed me goodnight. That's not much to hold on to for a lifetime, but it's all I have of John McAllister, who died of a sudden heart attack when I was 5 years old. The funeral is mostly a blur in my mind. I remember wearing an itchy black dress that my mother had rushed to buy, and I remember how people kept touching my head as if my hair was somehow connected to my grief. But most vividly, I remember my mother, Caroline, crumpling against the casket before they lowered it, her body convulsing with sobs while her sister held her up. "It's just us now, Tracy," she told me that night, her eyes vacant and her breath smelling like the grown-up juice that Aunt Martha had been pouring her all day. "We have to take care of each other." I didn't fully understand what that meant, but I nodded solemnly and promised I would. It would take me over 20 years to realize how that childish promise would become the chain I dragged behind me into adulthood. 6 months after Dad died, the money problem started. Dad had left us the house, a modest 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, but his life insurance only stretched so far. Mom had been a stay-at-home parent since I was born, and her resume had gathered dust. She found work as a receptionist at a dental office, but the pay barely covered our expenses. "Just until I get back on my feet," she'd say, whenever she borrowed from the small college fund Dad had started for me. "I'll put it back with interest, I promise." Those promises piled up like autumn leaves that nobody bothered to rake. By the time I was 7, Mom had met Richard Walker at a singles night that Aunt Martha had dragged her to. Richard was divorced, worked in commercial real estate, and had the kind of confidence that immediately filled a room. He moved in with us 3 months after their first date. "Rich is going to take care of us," Mom told me, her eyes sparkling, in a way I hadn't seen since before Dad died. "Isn't that wonderful, Tracy Bear? We won't have to worry anymore." I didn't like the way Richard ruffled my hair too hard, or how he referred to me as the kid when talking to his friends on the phone. But Mom was smiling again, and our refrigerator was full, so I nodded and smiled back when she asked if I was happy about our new family. A year later, they were married in a lavish ceremony that I now realize must have been largely financed by remortgaging the house my father had left to us. 2 months after that, Mom announced she was pregnant. Emma was born when I was 9 years old, a tiny pink bundle with our mother's blue eyes and Richard's strong jaw. "You're a big sister now," Mom cooed as she placed Emma in my reluctant arms. "You'll always look out for her, won't you, Tracy?" I nodded, not knowing that this was another promise that would eventually become a burden I couldn't put down. Richard's real estate business went through cycles, feast or famine, and our family finances followed the same turbulent path. One month we'd be shopping for new clothes and eating at restaurants. The next, Mom would be whispering arguments with Richard in the kitchen about overdue bills. The constant in this equation was that when things got tight, it was always my needs that were deemed less essential. "Emma needs these dance lessons for her confidence," Mom would explain, even as my request for SAT prep courses was denied. "You're naturally smart, Tracy. You don't need the extra help like she does." Or, "Richard's taking us to dinner to celebrate his new listing. You don't mind staying home to study, do you? We know how important your grades are to you." By the time I was 16, I'd internalized my role in the family. I was the self-sufficient one, the one who didn't need much, the one who understood when sacrifices had to be made. And those sacrifices were always mine to make. I graduated high school as valedictorian, earning a partial scholarship to State University. It wasn't the full ride I'd hoped for, nor was it the prestigious out-of-state school I'd dreamed of attending, but it would keep me close to home while still providing an escape. The night of my graduation, after the ceremony, where Mom had cried appropriately and Richard had clapped loudly at the right moments, I sat at our dining room table with the acceptance letter and financial aid package spread before me. "We're so proud of you," Mom said, squeezing my shoulder. "But about the remaining tuition?" I already knew what was coming. Richard's business had hit another slump. Emma, now 9, needed braces. The roof was leaking. There were a dozen reasons why they couldn't help me with college expenses. "I'll figure it out," I said, already calculating how many hours I'd need to work while taking a full course load. "I always do." Mom's relief was palpable. "You're so strong, Tracy. I don't know what we'd do without you." Those words should have been a comfort. Instead, they settled in my stomach like a stone. I worked through college, waitressing, tutoring, taking summer jobs that paid well, but left me exhausted. I lived at home to save on housing costs, which meant I also became the default babysitter for Emma, the chauffeur for her activities when Mom and Richard were busy, and the emotional support when their marriage hit rough patches, which was increasingly often. Despite everything, I managed to graduate with honors, landing an entry-level position at a marketing firm in the city. The salary wasn't impressive, but it was steady, and it came with health insurance and a 401k. Luxuries in my world. The day I received my first real paycheck, I opened a separate bank account that only I could access. I deposited half of it there, a small act of self-preservation that felt almost rebellious. "What are you going to do with your money?" Emma asked when I showed her my new business cards. She was 15 then, all gangly limbs and attitude, with Mom's beauty and Richard's entitled confidence. "Save some. Pay bills with the rest," I answered, not mentioning the secret account or the small dreams it might one day fund, a trip abroad perhaps, or a down payment on my own place. Emma wrinkled her nose. "That's boring. If I had a job like yours, I'd buy a car. Something cute, like a convertible?" I didn't tell her that my fancy job barely covered my student loans and the family contributions that had somehow become expected. The extra money for groceries when Richard's commission checks were delayed. The birthday gifts that were ostensibly from all of us, but funded entirely by me. The bailout cash when Mom's credit card was declined at the store. Instead, I ruffled her hair, much like Richard used to do to me. Maybe someday. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had become the financial safety net for the same people who had refused to be mine. The breaking point, or the beginning of it, came 3 years into my career. I had been promoted twice, had moved into a small but affordable apartment of my own, and had even started dating someone, Michael, an architect I'd met through work. For the first time, I was building a life that didn't revolve around my family's needs. Then Richard walked out, just packed his things one Tuesday while Mom was at her part-time job at the boutique and Emma was at school. He left a note on the kitchen counter, cliché as it sounds, saying he needed space and would be in touch about the divorce. Mom called me, hysterical, from the house they could no longer afford, the house that still had my name on the deed alongside hers, a fact that Richard had conveniently forgotten when he had remortgaged it multiple times over the years. "I don't know what we're going to do," she sobbed over the phone. "Emma's still in high school. The mortgage is 3 months behind. Richard's lawyer says he'll give me a fair settlement, but who knows what fair means to him now." I felt the familiar weight settle onto my shoulders, the weight of responsibility. that wasn't truly mine but that I'd been conditioned to carry. "I'll come over," I heard myself say. "We'll figure it out." And just like that, I was pulled back into the orbit of their needs, their crises, their expectations. Michael noticed the change immediately. "You're always exhausted," he observed one night as I canceled yet another date to help Emma with college applications. "And you're always giving them money. Don't you see what's happening?" I did see it, in flashes of clarity that were quickly overwhelmed by guilt. But acknowledging the pattern would mean confronting 2 decades of manipulation, and I wasn't ready for that earthquake. 6 months after Richard left, the bank began foreclosure proceedings on the house. Mom, who had never handled the finances during her marriage, was shocked to discover just how dire their situation was. The house that my father had proudly paid off, that should have been my inheritance someday, was about to be lost. I emptied my secret account, the one that had finally accumulated enough for a down payment on a condo, and brought the mortgage current. I also paid the property taxes that were 2 years overdue and settled the most pressing of Mom's credit card debts. "You're saving us," Mom wept when I showed her the receipts. "Your father would be so proud." But would he? Would my father be proud that I had sacrificed my own security to clean up a mess that Richard and my mother had created? Would he be proud that at 28, I had less in savings than I'd had at 23 because every step forward was followed by 2 steps back into family quicksand? I didn't know the answer. But what I did know was that I couldn't continue this way. The mortgage was current, but it wouldn't stay that way on Mom's boutique salary. Emma was starting college in the fall, state university, like me, but without the scholarships I'd earned. Someone would have to pay for that. "I think you should sell the house," I told Mom over coffee in the kitchen where I'd spent my childhood. "It's too big for just you, and the market is good right now. You could get a nice condo, maybe near Emma's campus." Mom looked at me as if I'd suggested she sell a limb. "This is our home, Tracy. Your home. I could never sell it." "It's not my home anymore," I reminded her gently. "I have my own place." "But you own half of it," she countered. "Your name is on the deed with mine. Your father wanted it that way." That was news to me. I'd always assumed Mom had full ownership. "My name is on the deed?" She nodded, then looked away quickly. "Of course. John set it up that way before he passed. For protection." Protection. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. My father had tried to protect me, to ensure I would always have a home, no matter what. And over the years, that protection had been quietly eroded by second mortgages and home equity loans that I'd never been consulted about. I left my mother's house that day with a strange feeling stirring in my chest, something between anger and resolve. I contacted a lawyer the next morning, asking him to investigate the title on the house and any encumbrances against it. His findings confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. The house was indeed in both my mother's name and mine, as equal owners. But Richard, as my mother's husband, had been able to take loans against their equity portion without my knowledge or consent. The current mortgage was significantly underwater. "You have options," the lawyer told me, "but none of them are without complications." Those complications multiplied a week later when Emma called me, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Travis proposed," she squealed over the phone. "We're getting married next summer." Travis was Emma's boyfriend of 8 months, a business major, from a wealthy family who struck me as more interested in networking than in genuine connection. But Emma was in love, or thought she was, and the wedding planning began immediately. Which brings me back to that moment at my kitchen table, with Emma sliding the wedding planner binder toward me, open to a venue that cost more than I made in a year. "You'll handle this part, right?" she asked, her eyes wide with expectation. "I mean, that's what big sisters do." I stared at her, this beautiful young woman who had grown up believing that her needs would always be met, often at my expense. I thought about the house that was partially mine, about the savings account I'd drained to save it, about the trips I hadn't taken and the life I'd put on hold, and something inside me, Something that had been bending for 23 years finally broke. "No," I said, my voice so quiet that Emma leaned forward to hear me. "No, that's not what big sisters do." Emma's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in confusion. "What?" I said. "No, Emma. I won't be paying for your wedding venue, or your dress, or your flowers, or your catering, or whatever else is in this binder that you expect me to fund." She looked at me as if I'd slapped her. "But you always help with the big stuff. Mom said—" "I'm sure Mom said a lot of things," I interrupted, surprised by my own calm. "But I'm saying something different now. I'm saying no." Emma's confusion gave way to anger. "This is the most important day of my life, Tracy. How can you be so selfish?" The word hit me like a physical blow. Selfish. After everything I'd given up, everything I'd contributed, everything I'd sacrificed, I was selfish for finally drawing a line. "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my apartment. Take your binder. Go plan the wedding you can afford, or ask Travis's parents to help, or take out a loan. But I'm done being your ATM." Emma stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the framed photo of our family, taken on her 5th birthday, fell from the wall and shattered on the floor. It was strangely fitting. I didn't hear from either Emma or my mother for 3 days. Then Mom called, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Emma is devastated," she began without preamble. "I don't know what's gotten into you, Tracy, but she needs your support right now. We all do. Richard's completely cut me off financially, and the house payments are due again next month." I took a deep breath. "I've been speaking with a lawyer." There was a pause, then, "A lawyer? What for?" "About the house," I said. "The house that's half mine, according to the deed. The house that's been remortgaged multiple times without my knowledge or consent." The silence on the other end of the line stretched taut between us. "Tracy," Mom finally said, her voice softer now, placating. "You know we've always done what was best for the family. Sometimes that meant making difficult decisions." "No," I interrupted. "You and Richard made decisions that were convenient for you, not what was best for the family. You made those decisions without consulting me, even when they directly affected my inheritance." "Your inheritance?" Her voice sharpened. "So that's what this is about, money?" "It's about respect," I corrected her, "and boundaries, and the fact that for my entire adult life, I've been expected to bail everyone out while putting my own needs last." "That's what families do, Tracy. They support each other." "Support is supposed to go both ways, Mom. When was the last time you supported me? When was the last time you asked about my goals, my dreams, what I might need?" Her silence was answer enough. "I'm selling my half of the house," I told her. "You can either buy me out at fair market value for my portion, or we can sell the entire property and split whatever's left after the mortgage is paid off." "You can't do that," she gasped. "Where would Emma and I live?" The fact that her first concern was logistics, not the fracturing of our relationship, told me everything I needed to know. "That's not my problem anymore," I said, surprised by how steady my voice was even as tears tracked down my face. "I'm done carrying everyone else's burdens." I hung up before she could respond, before she could unleash the familiar weapons of guilt and obligation that had kept me compliant for so long. The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations, property appraisals, and increasingly desperate phone calls from my mother and sister. I held firm, assisted by a therapist I'd started seeing who helped me recognize the patterns of emotional manipulation that had defined my family dynamic for decades. "What you're experiencing is the extinction burst," she explained during one session. "When a behavior that's been reinforced for years suddenly stops working, people often escalate dramatically before they accept the new reality. Stay strong." Staying strong meant weathering a storm of accusations from extended family members who'd heard only my mother's version of events. It meant blocking Emma's number after she sent me a series of texts alternating between vicious insults and tearful pleas. It meant changing the locks on my apartment after I came home one day to find my mother sitting in my living room, having used the emergency key I'd given her years ago. "We need to talk about this in person," she insisted, rising from my couch. "You're tearing apart this family, and for what? Money?" I stood in the doorway, keys still in hand, aware that this confrontation had been inevitable. "It's not about money," I said quietly. "It's about respect. It's about recognizing that I'm a person with my own life, not just a resource for everyone else to exploit." "Exploit?" Mom's voice rose. "Is that how you see your family? As people who exploit you?" "How would you describe it?" I countered. "For years, I've worked myself to exhaustion to support this family. I've put my own goals on hold. I've emptied my savings multiple times to solve crises that weren't of my making. And through it all, the only time anyone calls me is when they need something." Mom's face flushed. "That's not true. We love you, Tracy. Everything we've done has been as a family where I give and everyone else takes," I said, feeling oddly calm despite the confrontation. "That stops now. Because of some house? Some money?" She stepped toward me, her eyes pleading. "We can work this out, Tracy Bear. We always do." The childhood nickname sent a pang through me, a reminder of simpler times before I understood the cost of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who could always be counted on to put herself last. "There's nothing to work out," I said. "I've made my decision. My lawyer will be in touch about the house." "And what about Emma's wedding?" Mom demanded. "Are you really going to abandon your sister on the most important day of her life?" I looked at this woman who had raised me, who had loved me in her way, but had also used that love as a tool of control, and I felt something unexpected. Pity. "Emma will have the wedding she can afford," I said, "just like everyone else in the world. And if that means scaling back her plans or asking Travis's family to contribute, then that's what needs to happen." "You're being cruel," Mom accused, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "This isn't the daughter I raised." "No," I agreed. "It's the daughter I'm choosing to become." I held the door open, a clear invitation for her to leave. After a moment of stunned silence, she gathered her purse and walked past me, pausing at the threshold. "You'll regret this," she said softly. "Someday, when you need your family and we're not there for you, you'll regret pushing us away." I closed the door behind her, then leaned against it, feeling the weight of her words pressing against my chest. Would I regret it? Was I destroying my family over money and principle? But as the weeks passed and the legal process moved forward, something unexpected happened. I began to feel lighter. Without the constant drain on my finances and emotional energy, I found space to breathe, to think about what I wanted from life rather than what was expected of me. I started dating again, not Michael, who had moved on during my family crisis, but a kind, thoughtful man named David who listened when I talked about my day and didn't assume I would solve his problems. I enrolled in a photography class I'd been wanting to take for years, but had never found the time for. I began researching international volunteer opportunities, something I'd dreamed about since college. The house sold faster than expected, in a market hungry for properties in established neighborhoods. After the mortgage was paid off, there was enough left for my mother to make a modest down payment on a small condo, and for me to recoup some of the savings I'd depleted over the years. Mom and Emma moved into the condo, which was within walking distance of the community college, where Emma had transferred after dropping out of State University. A decision made, I suspected, less for academic reasons and more as a consequence of the lifestyle adjustment forced upon them by their new financial reality. I didn't attend Emma's wedding, which was held 6 months later in Travis's parents' backyard, a far cry from the lavish venue she'd originally planned. I sent a card and a modest gift certificate, a token gesture that I knew would be interpreted as either an olive branch or an insult, depending on the recipient's perspective. 3 days after the wedding, I received a text from Emma. The first, direct communication since our falling out. I get it now, not completely, but I'm starting to. Maybe we could talk sometime. It wasn't an apology, but it was an opening, a small crack in the wall that had formed between us. I texted back, I'd like that. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes, neutral territory for what would inevitably be a difficult conversation. Emma looked different, less polished, more genuine somehow. The chip on her shoulder that had been a fixture since adolescence seemed to have been knocked loose. Travis and I are moving to Cincinnati, she said, after we'd exchanged awkward greetings. His company is transferring him. It's a good opportunity. That's great, I said, meaning it. Distance from our mother might be the best thing for Emma's development. How does Mom feel about that? Emma stirred her latte, not meeting my eyes. She's not happy. She expected us to live with her for a while, to help with expenses. She looked up then, a flash of the old defiance in her gaze. But I'm not you, Tracy. I can't be the person everyone leans on. The statement hung between us, an acknowledgement of the role I'd played for so long. No one should have to be that person, I said softly. Not you, not me. She nodded, then reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I wanted to give you this. It's not much, but it's a start. Inside was a check for $500, a tiny fraction of what I'd contributed to the family over the years, but the gesture itself was worth more than the amount. Travis and I decided that once we're settled, we're going to pay you back, Emma continued. Monthly, whatever we can afford. Mom thinks I'm crazy. That family doesn't keep score, but... She trailed off, then met my gaze directly. You were right, about a lot of things. I felt something shift inside me, a knot of resentment loosening, just slightly. Thank you. That means a lot. We talked for nearly 2 hours, not solving everything but laying the groundwork for what might someday be a healthier relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation. As for Mom, our interactions remained strained. She had found work as an office manager, but struggled to adjust to her reduced circumstances. Occasionally, I would receive texts hinting at financial difficulties, tests to see if my resolve had weakened. I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I sent her information about financial counseling services, budget planning resources, and job training programs. She never acknowledged these offerings, but the financial SOS signals gradually decreased in frequency. A year after the house sold, I used my portion of the proceeds combined with my saved income to put a down payment on a small but charming bungalow. It had a spare bedroom that I converted into a home office where I could pursue freelance marketing projects in addition to my regular job. The backyard, though modest, had enough space for the garden I'd always wanted to plant. The day I moved in, David helped me arrange furniture and hang pictures. As we worked, I found myself repeatedly stopping to look around in wonder. This space was mine, truly mine, purchased with money I had earned and saved, filled with items I had chosen. No one could remortgage it without my knowledge. No one could make me feel guilty for having it. You look happy, David observed as we sat on the porch swing that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. At peace. I realized, surprised by the truth of it. The guilt that had been my constant companion for so long had faded to a manageable whisper. In its place was something unfamiliar but welcome. Pride in myself, in the boundaries I'd established, in the life I was building on my own terms. 2 months after I moved in, I received a letter from Mom. An actual letter, handwritten on stationery, a throwback to a more formal time. Inside, nestled between complaints about her health and updates on distant relatives, was a single sentence that caught me off guard. Your father would be proud of the woman you've become. I read it 3 times, trying to decipher whether it was sincere or another manipulation tactic. In the end, I decided it didn't matter. What mattered was what I believed about myself. And I believed that the 5-year-old girl who had promised to take care of her mother had kept that promise for far longer than anyone could have reasonably expected. I believed that the woman who had finally drawn a line and demanded respect had shown more courage than the one who had silently sacrificed for years. I believed that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their dependent behavior. Mostly, I believed that my father, who had tried to protect me even after his death, would indeed be proud of me for finally learning to protect myself. The following spring, I planted a small tree in my backyard, a maple, like the one that had stood in the yard of my childhood home. As I patted the soil around its slender trunk, I made a new promise to myself, to nurture my own roots, to grow in whatever direction felt right to me, and to remember that while family connections are important, so are healthy boundaries. Emma and Travis visited that summer on their way to a vacation in Florida. Emma was pregnant with their first child, a girl they planned to name Lily. We spent an afternoon looking through old family photos, laughing at forgotten memories and creating new ones. "Do you ever miss it?" Emma asked as she helped me prepare dinner, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "The old house, I mean. Our old life." I considered the question carefully. "I miss parts of it," I admitted. "The good times, the sense of belonging. But not the rest. Not the constant anxiety about money. Not the feeling that my needs always came last." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I don't want Lily to grow up the way we did. With that, I don't know how to describe it. Imbalance," I supplied. "That sense that love was conditional, based on what you could provide." "Yes, that." She looked down at her belly, then back at me. "I want to do better." "You will," I assured her, and in that moment I believed it. The cycle could be broken, one conscious decision at a time. Mom never fully accepted the new boundaries I'd established. Our relationship remained complicated, a dance of tentative steps forward and occasional retreats. But she no longer expected me to solve her problems, a change that benefited us both, even if she couldn't see it. As for me, I continued to build a life that reflected my own values and priorities. I volunteered at a financial literacy program for young adults aging out of foster care, sharing the hard-won knowledge that had come too late for me. I traveled, not extravagantly, but purposefully, seeing places I'd only dreamed about during those years of constant financial strain. I deepened my relationship with David, who understood my history and supported my ongoing journey towards self-reclamation. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the weight of family history feels particularly present, I take out the few photographs I have of my father. I study his face, searching for clues about the man he was and the relationship we might have had if he'd lived. I wonder if he knew somehow that his death would set in motion a pattern that would define my life for decades. Then I remind myself that while I can't change the past, I can honor it by living authentically in the present, by refusing to be defined solely by my utility to others, by recognizing that true family supports your growth, not just their own needs. On the anniversary of the day I told Emma no for the first time, a date I now think of as my personal Independence Day, I write a letter to my younger self. I tell her she is worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions. I tell her that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. I tell her that one day she'll find the strength to break free from the patterns that hold her captive. Then I seal the letter and put it away, knowing I'll add to it next year and the year after that, a chronicle of lessons learned and freedom earned, one difficult decision at a time. Because that's the thing about family patterns. They don't break in a single moment of defiance. They unravel slowly over years of consistent boundary setting and self-respect. It's not easy work, and it's certainly not finished. But standing in the life I've reclaimed, a life built on my terms, with relationships based on mutual respect, rather than obligation, I know it's worth it. Emma texts me pictures of Lily, who has my father's laugh, sudden and surprised by joy. Mom calls less frequently now, and when she does, it's sometimes just to talk, not to ask for anything. David and I discuss the future, weighing the pros and cons of marriage, considering what kind of family we might create together. One with clear boundaries and unconditional love existing side by side. And me? I'm learning still. Learning to recognize the old guilt when it surfaces and to address it compassionately but firmly. Learning to accept help when it's offered freely, without strings. Learning that setting boundaries isn't just about saying no to others. It's about saying yes to myself. Most importantly, I'm learning that family, real family, can be both challenging and supportive, demanding and nurturing. It can hold you accountable while holding space for your growth. It can honor the past without being imprisoned by it. As I water the maple tree in my backyard, watching it grow a little taller each year, I think about roots and branches, about what anchors us, and what helps us reach toward the light. I think about the little girl who promised to take care of her mother, and the woman who finally learned to take care of herself. Both are part of me. Both deserve to be honored. Both have something valuable to teach me about the person I'm still becoming. And that person I'm discovering day by day is someone I'm proud to be.